fällt es mir immer noch wesentlich einfacher, meine Vorträge auf Englisch zu halten, aber ich kann danach natürlich gerne auch. Okay, so then I will switch to English, and I'm not necessarily speaking about a good life, more about what it means to be a good patient from different perspectives, but I think it can be associated to what it also means to live a good life, especially after hospitalization. So my presentation is called A Tale of Two Minds, the morality of knowing and not knowing in a mental hospital in the Tanga region of Tanzania. Just short overview of my presentation. I will first speak about the mind, then I will turn to my fieldwork and public discourse on mental health and illness in the region where I've conducted my fieldwork. Then I will move to uncertainty, and then if there still will be time, I will speak about why I think this is important. If not, maybe this is something that we could cover in the Q&A section. So the mind. I struggled a bit to find an appropriate image for when talking about the mind. So maybe some of you know this image. It used to be very popular online the last couple of months. It is the first picture ever taken of a black hole, or better said, of an event horizon. The point is, although now we have an idea of what it looks like, there is a lot of speculation of what happens inside the black hole and beyond the event horizon. It is similar to when discussing the mind. There are probably as many definitions of the mind out there as there are theoreticians. So it seemed like a fitting metaphor. Nevertheless, there are two traditions that stand out. One of them is favored by anthropologists. It is the one proposed by Antonio Damasio. He speaks about the embodied mind, and he looks at the mind and its connections with nerve cells. Basically, the mind does not happen in the individual body, but it is connected to the environment, being social or otherwise. So I think that is why it's very popular among anthropologists. On the other hand, I use the example of Margaret Bowden, but there are many more other theoreticians out there that speak about the mind as cognition. The favored metaphor here is the mind functioning as the software, whereas the brain is the hardware, so to say. For my presentation, this latter definition is more important. First of all, because it is the most widespread definition within biomedicine and within biomedical psychiatry, and more importantly, it implies locality. So when we speak about mental illness coming from within this definition, we sort of know where the illness is placed. So we definitely associate it with the cognitive architecture and the brain. It is a definition based on Cartesian dualism, which basically understands the person as being a self-contained individual, and more importantly, it nurtures a discourse about informed patients. So basically what it means to be a good patient means that you are informed about the label of your illness and the possible consequences of it. As a proof of that stands, for example, the World Health Organization Action Plan for Mental Health and Illness for 2021, I think, which places a lot of emphasis on advocacy and on education. So, yeah. It is also so this definition, this second definition of the mind, also nurtures the discourse in the Tanga region where I've conducted my research, but I will speak more about it in a second. It is worth mentioning that the closest translation from English, so from mind to Kiswahili, would be the term akili. As you can see, it has many definitions, so many translatable forms. Usually it can be deduced out of context how people speak about akili, so about the mind. But very interesting for me was that in the hospital where I've conducted my research, so when for example practitioners speak about ugonjwa wa akili, so about mental illness, they refer to akili as the brain. So it's very specific. As I said, I will speak about this more a bit later. Whereas patients, when they speak about akili, they speak about the content of their thoughts. So it's quite a different explanatory pattern. Yeah. Now about my research. I've conducted 3 months of exploratory research for my master thesis in a psychiatric institution in the Tanga region of Tanzania. It is in a very remote location, so 15 kilometers up the Usambara mountains, for those of you who are familiar with Tanzania. There are no psychiatrists nor psychologists here. 4 psychiatric nurses look after around 100 patients, 80% of which are male, 20 female. and around 5 to 10% are Muslim patients. The rest are Christian patients. Roughly 60% of all the patients are diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or severe depression, while the rest is being treated for addiction. It is the oldest psychiatric institution in East Africa, and it was opened by German missionaries at the beginning of the 20th century. It has built over the last century very close ties to the surrounding villages, especially, which becomes apparent especially in the etiologies that the people from the villages use when speaking about mental illness. Most common is the understanding that substance abuse, so cannabis, heroin, and alcohol, the main addictions treated in the hospital, are the main cause for mental illness, but so is heredity, understood as transmitted by blood as well as stress. Now, religion also plays an important part here. So even if one looks at the villages that surround the hospital, they are named Nazareth and Cana and Bethania, so they have very religious names. And faith plays an important role for the hospital as well as for the surrounding communities. However, not in terms of etiology. So it's not like if you do not have a strong faith, you might suffer from a mental illness. But it is important in terms of illness outcome. So both clinicians and patients need to have a strong faith in order to guarantee a good illness outcome for the individual patients in the hospital. It is something that is not uncommon, especially in the Tanga region. For example, this picture I took at the Sebastian Kolovau University in Lushoto, about 1 hour away from the hospital. It is the only bachelor program in mental health and rehabilitation in Tanzania. There is only one other such program, a master program at the Muhimbili University in Dar es Salaam. And it is a private Christian university. And here I attended the graduation ceremony of the bachelor program in mental health and rehabilitation, where there was a lot of talk about the importance of religion, both for practitioners as well as for their future patients. For example, this sign here reads, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." This picture I took on the campus, so just to give you an idea about how this translates into higher education. I stand in the way, sorry. Now, despite this importance of religion, or if we think about the history of Christian medical missions in Tanzania and in East Africa in general, the model that clinicians use is still that of the broken brain. So, for example, when I spoke with clinicians in the hospital where I did my fieldwork about treatment, there is a lot of focus on psychotropic drugs, and when they explained how this works, is that when someone suffers from a mental illness, it's like a gap in the brain. So it's like a hole in the brain that medicine then helps to fill. Now, on the other hand, when speaking about their illness with patients, they have more diverse explanatory models than that. So witchcraft is common and possession by jinn, especially among Muslim patients, but not dissociated from mental illness. So you can both suffer from a mental illness caused, for example, by witchcraft or by the causes of it. And hospitalization time in the hospital where I did my fieldwork, so in Lutindi, is of about 2 months. So after I stayed 3 months there, as I said, and after 1 month, it was like, how come that the models that clinicians use is not contagious? Why is it not being passed to the patients, even after staying a long time in the hospital? And the answer I got to is related to a phenomenon that probably many of us who are at earlier stages of their careers are very familiar with, which is uncertainty. So, for the sake of time management, I will not go into the literature speaking about uncertainty in East Africa. There is a lot, and there is basically it started from the 70s, so I think questioning misfortune is already a classic. Just in broad lines, what's happening is that a very important coping mechanisms for people in Uganda, Tanzania, and both these later books are in Tanzania, is the ability to apprehend uncertainty. So the ability to apprehend uncertainty plays an important role in being able to live with severe life-threatening afflictions was the discussion first, but my research also suggests that also with let's say, biomedical illnesses, like, for example, schizophrenia. And how this happens is, first of all, people need to switch between different treatment traditions. So they need to have the ability to switch between different treatment traditions in order to maintain this uncertainty and have the perceived sense of being able to apprehend it eventually in order to live socially with it. And then another thing is the way diagnosis is being discussed. So for example, during admission interviews, there is no diagnostic label discussed with families, their relatives, or with clinicians. If there is talk about something, there is general talk about mental illness, but not specific diagnostic labels. And this basically has two consequences. On the one hand, staying for 2 months in the hospital makes for many patients no sense, because especially if they do not associate it with a biomedical label, when they feel better, let's say, they want to go back to the roles that they had previously. So I mostly spoke with male, and it was they wanted to be heads of households again, or become ones if they were very, very young. And on the other hand, it also left room for hope, because schizophrenia was not a way to be a person for these people. So they were there to get treatment. In case something would have happened, they would have switched to other treatment traditions as well and come back to the hospital as well. But envisioning the future, if you want, had a lot to do with finding a job, providing for their family, and living like a life rooted in the moral worlds outside of the hospital. So the envisioned moral worlds did not really correspond with the ones that clinicians were pushing. Although they agreed faith was important, for example, and that it was good to have faith, it was just as important to continue taking medicine from traditional healers. Why I think this is important, I'm not sure, do I still have time? Maybe this can... Yeah? Okay.
8 minutes.
8? I thought, okay. Okay, so why I think this is important. So on the one hand, the way we speak about... I forgot my one last argument here. Being able to apprehend uncertainty is an important ability of the mind, right? And that might be one of the reasons why patients are more inclined to speak about the contents of their thoughts when they speak about their illness. For example, when I asked about, I will just take the example of Ebenezer, who is in his early 20s. He finished a bachelor degree in accounting at the University of Nairobi in Kenya, and he uses the label mental illness, but at the same time considers that his mental illness was caused by witchcraft. Now, when I asked how does the illness affect his body and his mind, this was one of the questions I usually ask patients. He said that the way it affects his mind is that his thoughts are no longer his own. He's in constant communication with the people who have bewitched him. So, yeah, this is why I think. So, yeah. So basically, the uncertainty was hard to maintain as long as you are not individually responsible for the uncertainty that you want to apprehend. Now, turning to the last slide, and why I think this is important. So first of all, the way we speak about mental illness matters. So the attributing it to the mind as understood as being the brain, so as a biological organ, if you want, the minded organ of the human body, also transmits a certain message about the effectiveness of the treatment. So I had one example, several examples, but one I think sums it up quite brilliantly. Was a man in his early 50s who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I think 20 or 30 years ago. He was in and out of hospitals for 20 or 30 years. He did not use the label schizophrenia, although it was in his medical file. He used mental illness sometimes, and witchcraft more often than not. And when I spoke about the different treatments that he went through and asked him to compare the experience in the hospital with, example, the experience with the traditional healer, with the mganga, he told me that the medicine that he got in the hospital was good for his sleeping patterns. He had trouble sleeping, so the medicine he took helped him sleep. But then the medicine he took from the traditional healer helped him more with his dreams, which were one of the main troubles of his illness. Then another reason why I think this is important is, as I said earlier, there is now a strong focus, especially at a global level, on advocacy and on educating people about the labels of mental illnesses and about generally being knowledgeable about this phenomena, and which applies also for patients and also for caretakers. And the question that my research and probably other researchers in Tanzania as well raises is, at what cost do we do that? So if for these people it is more important not to know the label of their illness, as I said, it's not a way, if you compare to literature in North America and in Europe, especially, so in these two places, having the diagnosis of schizophrenia is a life-breaking event, which here appears not to happen. Although it must be said, I only did research in the hospital, so I only know how they envision their future. I do not know exactly how they live outside of the hospital and what implications the lack of diagnosis has for their lives outside of the hospital. But I think it's a question that needs to be raised, because these global policies usually come top down from a global level through state institutions, and then it's just being transmitted to people without seeing, okay, how do people actually deal with their illness to begin with. Then the question is, for example, especially with the people that I spoke with and who associated their illness to both biomedical, let's say, understandings of biomedical models and let's say local models of witchcraft or possession or whatever. When they associated with witchcraft, there was no shared experience. So it was a very individual matter. My aunt was jealous, so she bewitched me. Or my neighbors thought I am too beautiful, and they bewitched me, or whatever. So it's something that is rooted to individual biographies. And the question that it raises, if there is no shared experience, can one build a shared agency? For example, as you see in India, there's a strong movement involving people diagnosed with mental illnesses to organize themselves, and these movements are basically based on the shared experience of people suffering from diverse mental illnesses. Yeah, I think this is it. I will close here. So the literature. Thank you. Yeah.